The Montana Territory winter showed no mercy as the stagecoach rolled into Pinewood Springs, snow swirling around its wheels like memories of forgotten promises. Inside, Charlotte Foster held her 5-month-old twins closer, trying to shield them from the bitter cold that seeped through the coach's wooden frame. Little Lily whimpered against her shoulder while Noah slept peacefully despite the rough journey. This is a story about finding family in the most unexpected places, and how sometimes our greatest disappointments lead us to our most precious blessings. It's about a woman's courage to cross a continent for a chance at a better life, and a man learning that his heart's capacity to love again was greater than his grief. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Almost there, my darlings, Charlotte whispered, pressing a kiss to Lily's auburn curls. At 23, Charlotte had already endured more hardships than most, twice her age. The Civil War had claimed her brother, influenza had taken her parents, and Robert Foster, her husband of barely 11 months, had been killed in a railway accident just 2 months before the twins were born. Left alone in Boston with mounting debts and no family to turn to, Charlotte had made the most difficult decision of her life. The newspaper advertisement still felt crisp in her memory, though the actual clipping was worn thin from constant handling. Established businessman seeks respectable Eastern lady for marriage. Position offers stability and good standing in growing township. After weeks of correspondence, Thomas Sullivan's letters had convinced her that Pinewood Springs could offer her children what Boston couldn't: fresh air instead of factory smoke, open spaces instead of crowded tenements, and most importantly, a father figure who had written of his eagerness to provide for a ready-made family. Charlotte had sold everything except her wedding band, her grandmother's silver hand mirror, and what clothing and necessities she could pack in one trunk to fund the journey west. The remainder of her small inheritance had purchased passage for her and the twins on the Union Pacific Railroad as far as Cheyenne. Then the stagecoach to Pinewood Springs. Thomas's last letter, tucked securely in her coat pocket alongside the others, had promised he would meet her at the stagecoach stop. Pinewood Springs, final stop, the driver called, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. Charlotte adjusted her threadbare wool coat and gathered Lily more securely in her left arm while balancing Noah in her right. How she would manage to disembark with both babies and retrieve her trunk was a puzzle she hadn't yet solved when the stagecoach door swung open. "Need a hand, Ma'am?" The driver, a weathered man with a frost-covered beard, peered inside, his expression softening at the sight of the twins. "Got quite the handful there, I see." "Thank you, yes," Charlotte replied, grateful for the assistance as she carefully passed Lily to him, then stepped down into the snow, which immediately soaked through her thin-soled boots. The chill that shot up her legs made her gasp, but she forced a smile as she reclaimed her daughter. The stagecoach stop consisted of little more than a wooden platform adjacent to Pinewood Springs Main Street, a single dirt thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings, a general store with peeling paint, a small church whose steeple stood resolute against the harsh winters it had endured, a saloon with rough-looking men huddled around its entrance for warmth, and at the far end, a 2-story building with a sign identifying it as Sullivan's Mercantile and Dry Goods. Charlotte's heart leapt. Thomas Sullivan's business, the foundation of the security he'd promised in his letters. She scanned the small crowd gathered at the stagecoach's arrival, searching for the man who had described himself as 40 years, of age, of average height, with brown hair graying respectably at the temples, and a demeanor befitting a businessman of standing. "Mrs. Foster." Charlotte turned, hope rising in her chest despite her exhaustion. A tall man approached, well dressed in a wool coat that spoke of prosperity. His hair was indeed brown with silver at the temples, and his clean-shaven face might have been handsome if not for the deepening frown as his gaze moved from her face. "To the infants in her arms, Mr. Sullivan?" she asked, shifting Lily higher on her shoulder as the baby began to cry from the cold. "Thomas Sullivan, yes." His voice was clipped, nothing like the warm, inviting tone she'd imagined while reading his letters. He made no move to assist her or greet her properly. Instead, he stood stiffly, his eyes now fixed on the twins with unmistakable dismay. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you," Charlotte said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. "I apologize for Lily's crying. The journey has been long and they're both cold and hungry." "You didn't mention children in your letters," Thomas said flatly. "Not once." Charlotte blinked in confusion. "I most certainly did. In my second letter, I explained that I was recently widowed with infant twins. I was explicit about needing a fresh start for my small family. I received no such information." His tone suggested he believed she had deliberately deceived him. "I agreed to marry a widow, Mrs. Foster, not to take responsibility for another man's offspring." The stagecoach driver, who had been unloading her trunk, paused at the harsh words. Nearby conversations quieted as townspeople turned to observe the uncomfortable exchange. "There must be some mistake," Charlotte insisted, though doubt began to creep in. Had the letter explaining her children somehow gone astray? "I would never have undertaken such a journey without being forthright about my circumstances." Thomas Sullivan shook his head, taking a step backward as though to distance himself physically from the situation. "Mistake or deliberate omission, the result is the same. I have no interest in raising another man's children. I sought a wife to manage my household and present a respectable image for my business, not to inherit a ready-made family." Charlotte felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet. The babies, sensing her distress, both began crying in earnest. "What am I to do then?" she asked, struggling to maintain her composure as curious onlookers gathered. "I've spent everything I had to come here." "That's hardly my concern," Sullivan replied, though a flicker of discomfort crossed his face at the attention they were drawing. He lowered his voice. "There's a small hotel down the street. I'll pay for 2 nights' lodging. After that, you'll need to make other arrangements." Before Charlotte could respond, a woman pushed through the small crowd that had gathered. Middle-aged with grey streaked through her dark hair, she wore a practical dress beneath her heavy coat. She approached with concern etched on her kind face. "Everything all right here, Thomas?" she asked, though her gaze was fixed on Charlotte. "And the distressed twins?" "A misunderstanding, Mrs. Jenkins," Sullivan replied stiffly. "Mrs. Foster failed to mention certain complications in our correspondence." Mrs. Jenkins' eyes narrowed slightly at Sullivan's tone, but her expression remained polite. "I see." She turned to Charlotte, her face softening. "Those little ones are near frozen, poor things. The hotel's not fit for babies. Drafty old place. I'm Martha Jenkins. I run the boarding house just up the street. We have a room that would suit you and the little ones better." Charlotte's eyes stung with tears she refused to shed. "Thank you, but I'm afraid I have limited funds for lodging. We can discuss that later," Martha said firmly. "Right now, those babies need warmth, and I'd wager you could use a hot meal yourself." Thomas Sullivan cleared his throat. "As I was saying, I'll cover 2 nights' lodging." "That's very generous of you, Thomas," Martha interrupted, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "I'm sure your conscience is much relieved." She turned back to Charlotte. "Come along, dear. My son can bring your trunk." Charlotte found herself following Martha Jenkins away from the stagecoach stop, away from Thomas Sullivan and his broken promises, and toward an uncertain future in a town where she knew no one. The twins' cries had subsided to whimpers, small, puffs of breath visible in the cold air. As they walked, Charlotte caught sight of a tall man exiting a building with a sign that read, Dr. Benjamin Hayes, physician and surgeon. He paused, looking in their direction with evident curiosity before turning to speak with someone Charlotte couldn't see. Something in his steady gaze and the concerned tilt of his head made her wonder, fleetingly, if there might still be kindness to be found in this harsh new world she had entered. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Martha Jenkins's boarding house was a large two-story structure with a wide porch and windows glowing warmly against the gathering dusk. Inside, the entryway opened to a comfortable sitting room where a fire crackled in the hearth. The smell of beef stew and fresh bread filled the air, making Charlotte's stomach clench with hunger. "Peter," Martha called, "come help with this lady's trunk." A young man of perhaps 18 appeared from a back room, wiping his hands on a cloth. He took in the scene, Charlotte with the twins, his mother's determined expression, and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Is it still at the stage?" "Right where that fool Sullivan left it," Martha confirmed, helping Charlotte remove her coat while somehow managing to support her arm that held little Noah. After Peter departed, Martha guided Charlotte to a rocking chair near the fire. "Now then, let me hold one of these little angels while you warm up." Too exhausted to protest, Charlotte surrendered, Lily to the older woman's capable hands. Martha cooed to the baby while expertly checking her for any signs of cold exposure. "They seem healthy despite the journey," Martha pronounced. "How old?" 5 months next week," Charlotte replied, relaxing incrementally in the chair's gentle motion and the room's blessed warmth. "They were born early and small, but they've grown well," Martha nodded approvingly. "And their names?" "Lily and Noah. After my husband." Charlotte's voice caught. He died before they were born." Understanding filled Martha's eyes. "And so you answered Thomas Sullivan's advertisement?" "Yes." Charlotte didn't elaborate further. The humiliation of her reception was still too raw. Martha's expression hardened briefly. "Sullivan's a prominent businessman here, but he's always been more concerned with appearances than substance. I should have guessed his sudden interest in finding an Eastern bride had more to do with impressing his business associates than genuine companionship." The front door opened, bringing a blast of cold air as Peter returned with Charlotte's trunk. Another figure followed him inside, a tall man in a heavy coat dusted with snow, medical bag in hand. "Back so soon, Benjamin?" Martha asked. "I thought the Andersons' boy was laid up with that fever." "His fever broke," the man replied, removing his hat to reveal dark hair threaded with silver and a face lined by time and weather, yet handsome in its strong features. His eyes, a deep grey that reminded Charlotte of storm clouds, moved from Martha to Charlotte and the babies with undisguised curiosity. "Dr. Benjamin Hayes," Martha said by way of introduction. "Benjamin, this is Mrs. Charlotte Foster and her twins, Lily and Noah. They've had quite the welcome to Pinewood Springs, I'm afraid." Dr. Hayes hung his coat on a peg by the door, approaching with a practiced eye that seemed to take in Charlotte's pale exhaustion and the baby's condition in one sweeping glance. "Mrs. Foster was Thomas Sullivan's intended," Martha continued, her tone conveying volumes. "Was." Dr. Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Sullivan was unprepared for children," Charlotte said quietly, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Understanding dawned in the doctor's eyes, followed by something that might have been anger, quickly masked. "I see." He moved closer, bending slightly to observe Noah in Charlotte's arms. "May I? Traveling can be hard on little ones." Charlotte nodded, allowing the doctor to examine her son with gentle, competent hands. His touch was professional, yet somehow comforting, as he checked the baby's lungs, temperature, and reflexes. "Healthy little fellow," he pronounced, then repeated, the examination with Lily, who had calmed in Martha's arms. Both seemed no worse for the journey, though I'd recommend plenty of warmth, rest, and regular feeding to help them recover fully. "Thank you, Doctor," Charlotte said, relaxing slightly at his assessment. Benjamin delivered half the children in. "This territory," Martha said with obvious pride, "including my Peter, though that was some time ago." Dr. Hayes smiled briefly at this, the expression transforming his serious face into something unexpectedly warm. "Martha exaggerates, though I will say these two are fine specimens considering their journey. You must have taken excellent care of them under difficult circumstances, Mrs. Foster." The simple acknowledgement of her efforts, something no one had offered since she'd been widowed, brought a fresh wave of emotion that Charlotte struggled to contain. She blinked rapidly, focusing on Noah's tiny fingers wrapped around her own. "Now then," Martha said briskly, perhaps sensing Charlotte's fragile composure. "Peter, take Mrs. Foster's trunk up to the blue room. Benjamin, you'll stay for supper." "I hadn't planned to," the doctor began, then glanced at Charlotte again. Something in her expression, or perhaps the twins' presence, seemed to change his mind. "But I suppose my other patients can wait a bit longer." As Peter carried her trunk upstairs and Martha disappeared to the kitchen, with Lily still contentedly cradled in her arms, Charlotte found herself alone with Dr. Hayes. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with unasked questions. "I apologize for intruding on your hospitality," Charlotte finally said. "Once I've rested, I'll make arrangements to move on." Dr. Hayes studied her with those perceptive grey eyes. "Move on to where, Mrs. Foster?" The simple question laid bare the precariousness of her situation. Charlotte had no answer that didn't reveal the complete desperation of her circumstances. Before she could formulate a response that preserved some dignity, Noah began to fuss, his small face scrunching in. "Hunger, may I hold him while you prepare whatever he needs?" Dr. Hayes offered, extending his hands with a confidence that spoke of experience. Surprised, Charlotte handed Noah to him. Most men she'd known, including her late husband, had been hesitant with infants, especially fussy ones. But Dr. Hayes held Noah with practiced ease, speaking to him in low, soothing tones, while Charlotte retrieved a prepared bottle from her travel bag. "You seem comfortable with babies," she observed as she tested the milk's temperature on her wrist. A shadow passed over his face. "I had a son and daughter." He offered no further explanation, but the past tense told Charlotte all she needed to. "No, I'm sorry," she said simply, understanding the magnitude of such loss. He nodded once in acknowledgement, then watched as she fed Noah. "Pinewood Springs needs families, Mrs. Foster. The Montana Territory is hard on those who face it alone." "As I'm discovering," Charlotte replied with a wry smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps Thomas Sullivan's short-sightedness might prove fortunate for someone else in our community," Dr. Hayes said carefully. "Someone who understands the value of what he so carelessly rejected." Before Charlotte could interpret this cryptic statement, Martha returned with Lily, who was now happily gumming a wooden teething ring. "Supper's nearly ready," she announced. "I've had Peter prepare warm water for a bath for the little ones afterward. Nothing improves a trying day like clean babies and a full stomach." As Charlotte followed Martha to the dining room, she felt Dr. Hayes's gaze follow her. For the first time since arriving in Pinewood Springs, a fragile tendril of hope unfurled in her chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, this wasn't the end of her journey, but rather an unexpected detour on the path to the home she sought. Dr. Hayes remained for supper, watching with evident approval as Charlotte managed to eat while simultaneously tending to the twins. His presence added a sense of stability to the meal, his deep voice and occasional quiet humor creating an atmosphere so normal that Charlotte could almost forget the disaster of her arrival when he finally rose to leave, retrieving his medical bag and heavy coat. He paused beside Charlotte's chair. Mrs. Foster, I wonder if I might call on you tomorrow. There's a matter I'd like to discuss. Something in his tone suggested more than professional concern, though his manner remained entirely proper. Charlotte found herself nodding. Of course, and doctor, I'd be pleased to receive you. Until tomorrow, then. He tipped his hat slightly and departed into the snowy evening, leaving Charlotte to wonder what possible proposition he might have in mind, and why the prospect of seeing him again brought unexpected comfort after a day filled with disappointment and uncertainty. Later, as she tucked the freshly bathed twins into a borrowed cradle in the cozy blue room, Charlotte allowed herself to consider just briefly that perhaps her journey hadn't been in vain after all. Different doors might be opening, even as others had closed so firmly in her face. With that glimmer of possibility warming her heart, she drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks. Morning light filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the blue wallpaper of the boarding house room. Charlotte woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the twins' soft breathing beside her brought reality rushing back. The events of yesterday, the humiliating rejection, Martha Jenkins' kindness, Dr. Hayes' thoughtful gaze, all settled over her like the patchwork quilt covering her bed. The twins still slept, exhausted from their journey. Charlotte slipped quietly from bed, washing her face in the porcelain basin and changing into her second-best dress, a faded blue cotton that had once been quite fine. Her reflection in the small mirror revealed dark circles beneath her eyes despite her night's rest. She pinched her cheeks for color and smoothed her honey-blonde hair into a simple bun, desperate to present a composed image that belied her inner turmoil. A soft knock at the door interrupted her preparations. Martha Jenkins entered carrying a tray with steaming coffee, fresh bread and preserves. Thought you might prefer breakfast up here this morning, she said, setting the tray on a small table. Those little ones still sleeping? Charlotte nodded gratefully. They rarely sleep this long. The journey must have exhausted them. Travel's hard on the smallest ones, Martha agreed, pouring coffee into a delicate cup. I've prepared bottles for when they wake. My Peter found your formula supplies in your trunk. Hope you don't mind. Of course not. Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Jenkins. Martha, please, we don't stand on ceremony here in Pinewood Springs. Charlotte hesitated, then voiced the question that had plagued her through the night. I must ask what Dr. Hayes charges for medical consultations. Martha's eyebrows rose. Are the babies ill? No. But his examination yesterday, I have little money, but I insist on paying my debts. Martha's expression softened. Benjamin wouldn't dream of charging for that. He was simply ensuring the twins were well after their journey. Charlotte's pride bristled despite her gratitude. I don't seek charity, Martha. And none is being offered, Martha replied firmly. Merely neighborliness, something in short supply from certain quarters of Pinewood Springs, it seems. Her tone made clear she referred to Thomas Sullivan's rejection. Charlotte sipped her coffee, gathering courage for her next question. I must inquire about your rates for lodging as well. Mr. Sullivan mentioned paying for 2 nights, but Sullivan sent money around this morning by his shop boy, Martha interrupted. Paid for a week, actually, though he included a note saying he'd told you differently. She sniffed disapprovingly. Trying to pressure you into leaving sooner, I expect. Shame doesn't sit well on some men's shoulders. A week, Charlotte's mind raced. 7 days to determine her next steps, to find employment or another solution in this town where her introduction had been public humiliation, where she knew no one except the kind woman before her and the enigmatic doctor who had treated her children with unexpected gentleness. A week gives you time to consider options, Martha continued, seemingly reading Charlotte's thoughts. Pinewood Springs is growing. There might be opportunities for a capable woman. I was a teacher before I married, Charlotte admitted. Though I doubt any school would hire a woman with infant twins. Perhaps not the school, Martha acknowledged, but there are families who might value education for their children. ranchers and farmers whose homesteads lie too far from town for daily attendance. This possibility hadn't occurred to Charlotte. A flicker of hope kindled in her chest, quickly tempered by practicality. Even so, I would need accommodation that allows for the twins, and I doubt private tutoring would provide enough for rent and necessities. Martha hesitated, then spoke carefully. There is another possibility, though I hesitate to mention it so soon after your recent disappointment. Charlotte steeled herself. Please speak plainly. There are men in this territory, respectable, established men who would value a wife with your qualities. Men who, unlike Thomas Sullivan, understand that children are a blessing, not a burden. The prospect of another arranged marriage made Charlotte's stomach clench, but she forced herself to consider it objectively. Her primary responsibility was to her children. If another match offered them security and a proper home, could she refuse based on her own wounded pride? I appreciate your suggestion, Charlotte said carefully, though I confess the thought of presenting myself for approval again is daunting. Martha reached across the table to pat Charlotte's hand. No presentations necessary. Simply join community. Gatherings as my guest. Attend Sunday services. Meet people naturally. Pinewood Springs has good folk despite your first impression. Before Charlotte could respond, Lily began to fuss, her cries quickly escalating as was her habit. Noah would soon follow. The twins rarely allowed one to command attention for long. Charlotte moved to the bed, lifting Lily and murmuring soothing words while casting an apologetic glance at Martha. I'll bring up those bottles, Martha said, rising. And perhaps you join us downstairs once these little ones are settled. The parlour gets lovely morning light, and my other boarders would welcome the company. After Martha departed, Charlotte changed and fed the twins, her mind turning over possibilities. Tutoring might provide some income, but likely not enough. Another marriage could offer stability, but after Sullivan's rejection, the thought made her chest tighten with anxiety, and beneath these practical concerns lay a deeper fear that she had made a terrible mistake coming to Montana Territory, risking her children's well-being on promises penned by a stranger. Dressed and composed, Charlotte carried the twins downstairs an hour later. The boarding-house parlour was indeed bathed in morning light, revealing a comfortable room with well-worn furniture and simple but tasteful decorations. Two elderly men sat near the window, playing chess and conversing quietly. A middle-aged woman in a railroad uniform read a newspaper in the corner. All looked up as Charlotte entered with the twins. Mrs. Foster, Martha said, emerging from another room. Allow me to introduce some of my other boarders, Mr. William Perkins and Mr. George Abernathy, both retired from the Northern Pacific Line, and Mrs. Sarah Carson, who works as a telegrapher. At our station, greetings were exchanged, the gentleman immediately rising to admire the twins. Charlotte found herself seated in a comfortable chair, Lily taken by Mr. Perkins and Noah by Mr. Abernathy, both men cooing and reminiscing about their own children, now grown with families of their own. Such beautiful babies, Mr. Perkins declared. Look at these eyes, so alert and healthy. Not always the case with little ones who've travelled so far, Mr. Abernathy added. Must have excellent care. Dr. Hayes examined them yesterday, Martha explained. Pronounced them in excellent condition, despite their journey. Benjamin Hayes is the finest physician in 3 territories, Mrs. Carson stated with authority. Trained at Harvard Medical School before coming west. Could have had a prestigious practice back east, but chose to serve where doctors are scarce. After the tragedy, of course. Tragedy? Charlotte inquired, but before Mrs. Carson could elaborate, the front door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and Dr. Hayes himself. He removed his hat, revealing hair slightly disheveled from the wind, and nodded greetings to the assembled company. Martha, he said warmly, perfect timing. Coffee's fresh. Actually, I've come on business, he replied, his gaze finding Charlotte. Mrs. Foster, I wonder if I might speak with you privately. A flutter of apprehension rose in Charlotte's chest. Had he discovered some concern about the twins after yesterday's examination? Her worry must have shown on her face, for he quickly added, "Nothing regarding your children's health. They seem remarkably resilient." Slightly relieved, but still. Curious, Charlotte reclaimed Lily from Mr. Perkins, while Martha took Noah from Mr. Abernathy. "My study would give you privacy," Martha suggested, gesturing toward a small room off the main parlor. Once inside the simply furnished office with Lily dozing against her shoulder, Charlotte faced Dr. Hayes with as much composure as she could. "Muster, how may I help you, Doctor? It's how I might help you that brings me here," he replied directly. "I understand from Martha that Sullivan has provided lodging for a week, but your situation beyond that remains uncertain." Charlotte stiffened, pride warring with practicality. "I assure you I'm exploring options." "Of course," he nodded, "but perhaps I might offer one you haven't considered." He hesitated, then continued more carefully. "I find myself in need of assistance with my practice, someone to maintain records, prepare basic remedies, and assist with patients when appropriate. Your educational background as a teacher suggests you have the necessary skills." Charlotte blinked in surprise. "You're offering me employment?" "I am," he confirmed. "The position includes accommodation. My home adjoins my office and has a room. The previous doctor's wife designed it for a large family." Something like pain flickered across his face, there and gone so quickly Charlotte might have imagined it. "That's unexpectedly generous," Charlotte said cautiously. "But I must ask, would the arrangement accommodate my children? They require considerable attention." "I had assumed the position would include the twins," Dr. Hayes replied. "In fact, their presence would be an advantage. Many of my patients are mothers with young children who might feel more comfortable seeing your babies thriving under the same roof where they seek treatment." The offer seemed almost too perfect, raising Charlotte's suspicions. "Forgive my directness, Doctor, but why would you extend such an opportunity to a complete stranger?" His grey eyes held hers steadily. "Qualified help is scarce in Pinewood. Springs, you're educated, obviously capable, and in need of a situation that accommodates your children. Our needs align." It was a practical answer, yet Charlotte sensed something unspoken beneath it. Still, she couldn't deny the position solved her most pressing concerns: shelter, income, and the ability to care for her children while working. "I would need to consider your offer carefully," she said finally. "Perhaps visit your home and office to better understand the duties involved." "Of course," he agreed immediately. "Would this afternoon be convenient?" "I have appointments until noon, but afterward I could show you the facilities." They arranged a time, and Dr. Hayes departed shortly after, leaving Charlotte to face the curious gazes of Martha and her boarders. She explained the doctor's proposal as simply as possible, downplaying its fortuitous timing. "Well, Mr. Perkins," exclaimed when Charlotte finished, "that's Benjamin for you, always seeing possibilities where others see problems." "It would be a respectable position," Mrs. Carson added approvingly, "and far better than accepting another marriage proposal." Out of desperation. "Sarah!" Martha scolded with a glance toward Charlotte. "Oh, I mean no offense, dear," Mrs. Carson said quickly, "but we all know why you came to Pinewood Springs, and after Sullivan's shameful behavior," she shook her head, "better to establish yourself independently first. Marriage can wait until the right offer comes along." Despite her embarrassment at having her circumstances so openly discussed, Charlotte found wisdom in the older woman's words. Dr. Hayes's offer provided breathing room, time to establish herself in Pinewood Springs before making more permanent decisions about her future. That afternoon, Martha offered to watch the twins while Charlotte visited Dr. Hayes's practice. "They'll be fine with me," she assured Charlotte, "and you'll think more clearly without them for an hour or two." Charlotte hadn't been separated from her babies since their birth, and the prospect both worried and relieved her. Worry won briefly. until Martha demonstrated her obvious competence with infants, settling both twins in a cradle she'd had Peter bring down from the attic. "My sister had her babies in this," Martha explained softly as she gently rocked the cradle. "It's good to see it used again." This second reference to Martha's sister stirred Charlotte's curiosity further, but she refrained from prying. Instead, she thanked Martha and set out for the doctor's office located on Pinewood Springs Main Street, just past the church. The building was larger than Charlotte expected, a well-maintained two-story structure with Dr. Benjamin Hayes, physician and surgeon, painted on a wooden sign above the door. A separate entrance at the side presumably led to the adjoining residence. The waiting room was empty when Charlotte entered, but a young woman looked up from a desk near a doorway that likely led to examination rooms. "Mrs. Foster?" the woman asked, rising. "I'm Amy Wilson, Dr. Hayes' nurse. He's just finishing with his last patient and asked me to make you comfortable." She gestured to a chair. "May I offer coffee while you wait?" "No, thank you," Charlotte replied, taking the offered seat and studying the waiting room. It was clean and orderly, with simple but comfortable furnishings. Medical texts lined bookshelves along one wall, while framed anatomical illustrations hung on another. Everything spoke of competence and care. Amy returned to her desk, organizing patient files with practiced efficiency. "Dr. Hayes mentioned you might be joining our practice," she said conversationally. "We've needed help since Mrs. Patterson left to care for her ailing mother in St. Louis." "He's offered a position," Charlotte clarified, "though I haven't accepted. Yet I know little about medical practice." Amy smiled reassuringly. "Most of the work involves organization and common sense, which Dr. Hayes says teachers have in abundance. Medical knowledge comes with time." She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Between us, it would be a relief to have another woman here. I'm only part-time since my husband farms, and some female patients prefer women present during examinations." Before Charlotte could respond, a door opened, and Dr. Hayes appeared with an elderly man who was thanking him profusely for something. After seeing his patient out, the doctor turned to Charlotte. "Mrs. Foster," he nodded, his expression warming. "Thank you for coming. I hope Amy has made you welcome." "Very much so," Charlotte assured him, rising. "Good. I thought we might start with a tour of the office, then the residence, if that suits you." The tour was thorough and informative. The medical office consisted of 2 examination rooms, a small surgery, a dispensary for medicines, and a private consultation room. Dr. Hayes explained the filing system, inventory procedures for medical supplies, and the basic duties that would fall to Charlotte if she accepted the position. "I don't expect medical knowledge initially," he assured her. "That can be learned. What I need most is organization, attention to detail, and discretion. Patient confidentiality is sacred." "I understand," Charlotte said, impressed by the systematic way he ran his practice. He led her through a door at the back of the office into a covered walkway connecting to the residence. The house was surprisingly large and well-appointed, clearly designed for a family much larger than a single man. A spacious kitchen with modern conveniences, a formal dining room, a comfortable parlor with well-stocked bookshelves, and upstairs, 4 bedrooms, including a nursery, still furnished with a crib and small bed. Dr. Hayes paused in the doorway of this room, his expression unreadable. "This would be suitable for your twins as they grow," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "It has southern exposure, warm in winter, catches the breeze in summer." Charlotte walked to the window, noting the view of a small garden, now dormant under snow. The nursery was cheerful despite its disuse, with faded alphabet letters painted along one wall and colorful quilts folded neatly at the foot of the small bed. This had been a room created with love, she realized, not merely furnished, but designed to delight its occupants. "It's perfect," she said softly, then turned to face him directly. "Dr. Hayes, "May I ask a personal question?" He seemed to brace himself, but nodded. "Proceed, Mrs. Foster." Mrs. Jenkins mentioned a cradle that belonged to her sister and this nursery. She hesitated, unsure how to continue without causing pain. "You're wondering about my family," he finished for her. "It's a natural question, given I'm offering you residence in a home clearly built for children." He drew a deep breath. "My wife, Catherine, and our children, Jacob and Emily, died of diphtheria 4 years ago. I was attending patients in outlying homesteads during a particularly harsh winter. By the time I returned—" He left the sentence unfinished, the conclusion evident. "I'm so sorry," Charlotte said, understanding now the shadows she'd glimpsed in his eyes. It was a difficult time, he acknowledged, his composure admirable despite the obvious pain. "For years, I maintained this house exactly as they left it. Recently, I've come to realize Catherine would have hated seeing rooms meant for living left unused out of grief." Charlotte nodded, moved by his honesty. "It's a beautiful home. Your wife had excellent taste." "She did," he agreed with the ghost of a smile, "and a practical nature that would approve of its use by someone who needs it." He gestured toward the stairs. "There's more to see if you wish, or we can discuss terms if you've seen enough." "I believe I've seen what I need to," Charlotte replied. "The position seems well suited to my situation, and the accommodation is more than generous." She paused, wanting to be completely transparent. "I should mention that while I'm a quick learner, my experience with medical matters is limited to basic first aid and caring for my children through minor illnesses. As I said, medical knowledge can be acquired," Dr. Hayes assured her. "Amy will assist with patient care until you're comfortable taking on those duties. Initially, I need someone to manage the office, prepare simple tinctures and remedies from established formulas, and maintain order in both house and practice." They proceeded to discuss specifics, hours, compensation, duties, and when Charlotte might begin. The terms were more than fair, offering security she hadn't dared hope for just 24 hours earlier. Yet beneath her gratitude lay an unsettling question. Was she accepting this position because it truly suited her, or because desperate circumstances left her no choice? As if sensing her internal conflict, Dr. Hayes said quietly, "Take until tomorrow to consider, Mrs. Foster. This decision affects not only you, but your children. I wouldn't rush you into something of such consequence." His consideration touched her. How different from Thomas Sullivan's cold dismissal was this man's thoughtful respect for her autonomy, even knowing her precarious situation. "Thank you, Doctor. I shall give you my answer tomorrow." Charlotte extended her hand, which he took briefly in a formal handshake. "Regardless of my decision, your kindness has been unexpected." His eyes held hers for a moment. "Sometimes the journey we plan takes an unexpected turn, Mrs. Foster. In my experience, those detours often lead exactly where we need to go, though we couldn't have known it when we set out." As Charlotte walked back to the boarding house through the crisp afternoon air, his words echoed in her mind. Her carefully planned future with Thomas Sullivan had crumbled upon arrival. Yet within 24 hours, another path had opened. One that offered independence rather than subservience, partnership rather than patronage. By the time she reached Martha's porch, her decision was made. She would accept Dr. Hayes's offer, not out of desperation, but because it presented an opportunity to build something meaningful from the ruins of her plans, to provide for her children through her own abilities rather than a man's charity. The twins greeted her with bright eyes and eager movements, having enjoyed their time with Martha, but clearly delighted at their mother's return. As Charlotte gathered them close, inhaling their sweet baby scent, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope, unqualified and unburdened by fear. Tomorrow would bring a new beginning, not the one she had traveled across a continent to find, but perhaps one better suited to the woman she had become through loss and resilience. For the first time since departing Boston, Charlotte Foster felt not like a supplicant seeking rescue, but a woman with valued skills and a future of her own making. Charlotte's first week at Dr. Hayes' practice passed in a blur of new routines and adjustments. She had accepted the position the morning after their tour, much to Martha Jenkins' approval. By week's end, she and the twins were comfortably settled in the doctor's residence, occupying rooms unused since tragedy had emptied them 4 years prior. The early March weather remained stubbornly cold, but inside the doctor's home, warmth prevailed. Charlotte established a nursery in the cheerful room, with alphabet letters painted on the walls, arranging the twins' meager belongings alongside the toys and furnishings that had belonged to Jacob and Emily Hayes. She had offered to store these mementos, but Dr. Hayes had shaken his head. They were meant to be used, he'd said simply. Let them serve their purpose again. On this particular morning, Charlotte rose before dawn, as had become her habit. The twins still slept, their schedule gradually adjusting to the rhythms of the household. She dressed quickly in the practical navy skirt and white shirtwaist that had become her work uniform, then padded downstairs to prepare breakfast before the day's appointments began. She found Dr. Hayes already in the kitchen, coffee brewing on the stove. He wore a crisp white shirt, his suit jacket and tie still hanging on the hook by the back door. "You're up early," she observed, reaching for the flour canister. She had discovered the doctor preferred biscuits to toast, a preference she was happy to accommodate given his generosity. "Couldn't sleep," he replied, pouring coffee into 2 cups and setting one on the table for her. "The Mason farm sent word late last night. Caroline's time is near. First baby." He sipped his coffee, watching as Charlotte efficiently mixed biscuit dough. "I thought I might ride out this morning to check on her." Charlotte nodded, cutting butter into the flour with practiced movements. "Will you be gone all day?" "Depends on her progress. First babies often take their time." He hesitated. "I've asked Amy to come in, but she can only stay until noon. Her husband needs her help with a sick horse." "I'll manage the office," Charlotte assured him, shaping the dough into rounds and placing them on a baking sheet. She had quickly mastered the filing system and basic office procedures, though she remained hesitant about medical matters. "Should I reschedule afternoon appointments?" Dr. Hayes considered this. "Only Mrs. Thompson. She's coming for her monthly tonic for nerves. Nothing urgent. The others are mostly dressing changes and follow-ups I'd rather not postpone." Charlotte slid the biscuits into the oven, then joined him at the table, warming her hands around the coffee cup. "I'll need instructions for the dressing changes. Simple ones only. I've noted the procedures in each patient file." His confidence in her abilities warmed her more than the coffee. "You've learned quickly these past weeks." "I've had an excellent teacher," she replied, then blushed slightly at his appreciative smile. Their morning routine had developed an easy familiarity that still surprised Charlotte. Dr. Hayes breakfasted with her, then checked on the twins when they woke, while she prepared bottles. He never seemed to mind the disruption they brought to his orderly bachelor existence. On the contrary, he often found excuses to interact with them, examining their developing skills with a doctor's eye, but also with genuine interest. This morning followed the pattern until a knock at the back door signaled the arrival of Peter Jenkins, Martha's son, who had come to drive the doctor to the Mason farm. "I'll likely return by supper," Dr. Hayes told Charlotte, as he gathered his medical bag and heavy coat. "Send word with Peter if any emergencies arise." After his departure, Charlotte settled into the day's tasks. The twins cooperated by napping, longer than usual, allowing her to organize patient files and prepare the examination rooms before Amy Wilson arrived to assist with morning appointments. "You're a natural at this," Amy commented as they worked. The older woman had initially seemed wary of Charlotte, perhaps concerned about being replaced, but had warmed considerably upon realizing Charlotte had no desire to usurp her position. "Most take months to learn what you've mastered in weeks," Amy continued. "Teaching requires organization," Charlotte replied, labeling newly prepared tinctures of willow bark for fever and chamomile for digestive complaints. "And raising twins demands efficiency." Amy laughed, checking the supply of clean bandages. "True enough. Speaking of the little ones, they're thriving here. Some whispered you might not manage both work and motherhood, but you've proven them." "Wrong." Charlotte stiffened slightly. "Some meaning Abigail Sullivan, I presume." Amy had the grace to look embarrassed. "Gossip travels in small towns." "Abigail Sullivan was quite vocal about her brother's disappointment," Charlotte said dryly. She had encountered Thomas Sullivan's sister only once since her arrival, at Sunday services, where the woman had pointedly avoided introducing her to the church's social circle. The rejection had stung, though Charlotte pretended indifference. "Pay her no mind," Amy advised. "The Sullivans fancy themselves Pinewood Springs royalty, since their family founded the Mercantile 30 years ago. But Dr. Hayes has more respect in this town than all the Sullivans combined." The morning passed with a steady stream of patients. A rancher with a deep cut from mending fences, a child with an ear infection, an expectant mother seeking reassurance about her advancing pregnancy. Amy handled most medical aspects, while Charlotte managed records, payments, and dispensing prescribed remedies. At noon, Amy departed regretfully. "I'd stay if I could, but John is hopeless with sick animals. If I don't help, we'll lose a valuable horse." "We'll manage," Charlotte assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at her confidence as the afternoon patients began arriving. The first 2 appointments proceeded smoothly, both simple dressing changes that followed Dr. Hayes's detailed instructions. "Exactly." Charlotte was just beginning to relax when the bell above the office door jangled, and Thomas Sullivan himself entered, supporting an ashen-faced young man whose right hand was wrapped in a blood-soaked cloth. "My clerk," Sullivan announced without preamble, sliced his palm opening crates. "Where's Hayes?" Charlotte straightened, refusing to be intimidated by the man who had so publicly humiliated her. "Dr. Hayes is attending a birth at the Mason farm. I can help or send for him if necessary." Sullivan's expression darkened with recognition as he properly looked at her for the first time. "You? What are you doing here?" "Mrs. Foster is my assistant," came a deep voice from behind them. Dr. Hayes stood in the doorway, his coat dusted, with snow, medical bag in hand, and fully qualified to assess whether a situation requires my immediate attention. Relief flooded Charlotte, followed quickly by concern. "The Mason baby? Delivered safely an hour ago. Mother and daughter are doing well." His gaze shifted to the injured clerk. "Let's examine that hand." Sullivan withdrew as Dr. Hayes took charge, leading the young man to an examination room. Charlotte followed with clean bandages and instruments, leaving the merchant standing awkwardly in the waiting area. The injury proved serious, but not life-threatening. A deep laceration requiring several stitches, but no damage to tendons or nerves. Charlotte assisted competently, handing instruments, preparing suture materials, and cleaning the wound as directed. The clerk, whose name was William Reynolds, remained stoic throughout the procedure, thanking them profusely once his hand was neatly bandaged. "You'll need to rest that hand for at least 3 days, Dr. Hayes instructed. "No lifting, no writing, minimal movement. Mrs. Foster will prepare a tincture for pain." As Charlotte mixed the prescribed remedy, she overheard Sullivan's protests in the waiting room. 3 days without my clerk? Impossible. The spring shipments arrive tomorrow. "Infection is a greater threat than delayed inventory," Dr. Hayes replied firmly, "unless you prefer to risk losing him permanently to blood poisoning." Charlotte handed the tincture to young Reynolds, along with written instructions. 2 drops in water every 4 hours as needed for pain, she explained. Return in 3 days for Dr. Hayes to examine the wound. Sooner if you notice increased redness, swelling, or fever. After the clerk departed, Sullivan lingered, his discomfort evident as he shifted his weight from foot to foot. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Mrs. Foster, I owe you an apology." Charlotte froze in the act of recording the treatment in the patient ledger. Of all the things she had expected from Thomas Sullivan, an apology ranked least likely. "My behavior upon your arrival was ungentlemanly," he continued stiffly. "I've since learned that your letter explaining the children's existence did indeed arrive, but was misplaced by my sister during a bout of influenza. She found it last week among papers she had set aside while ill." Charlotte set down her pen carefully. "I see. Had I known about the twins from the beginning, I might have—" He stopped, perhaps realizing no version of that sentence improved his standing. "You might have what, Mr. Sullivan?" Charlotte's voice remained steady despite the anger simmering beneath her composed exterior. "Rejected me by letter instead of in person. Saved us both the embarrassment of a public scene." Sullivan flushed. "I merely meant—" "I believe Mrs. Foster understands your meaning perfectly," Dr. Hayes interrupted, his tone deceptively mild, though Charlotte noted the tension in his jaw. "Your apology is noted. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have other patients waiting." No other patients waited, in fact, but Sullivan didn't challenge the claim. With a stiff nod, he departed, the bell jangling discordantly in his wake. Silence stretched between them until Charlotte spoke. "Thank you for your timely return, Doctor." "Fortuitous timing," he agreed, removing his coat, "though from what I observed, you were handling Sullivan quite capably on your own." "Sullivan doesn't concern me," Charlotte replied, returning to her record-keeping, "though I admit I was relieved to have your expertise for his clerk's injury. A deep laceration requires more skill than I currently possess." Dr. Hayes studied her for a moment, then made a decision. "Perhaps it's time to expand your medical training beyond basic procedures. You've mastered the administrative aspects more quickly than I anticipated." Charlotte looked up in surprise. "Would you teach me more advanced skills? If you're willing to learn," he replied. "Your steady hands and attention to detail would serve you well in medical practice, and having another trained person in Pinewood Springs would benefit the community, especially when I'm called away on distant cases." The offer stirred something in Charlotte that had lain dormant since her teaching days. Intellectual curiosity, the satisfaction of mastering new knowledge. "I would be honored to learn whatever you're willing to teach," she said sincerely. His expression warmed. "We'll begin tomorrow then. Basic anatomy first, then common ailments and treatments." He glanced at the clock on the wall. "For now, I believe it's time to check on your children. They've been remarkably quiet all afternoon." Charlotte started, realizing the twins had indeed slept much longer than usual. Together, they walked through the connecting passage to the residence, finding both babies awake but contentedly babbling to each other in their crib. The sight of the normally active twins peacefully entertaining themselves brought a smile to Charlotte's face. "They're becoming more aware of each other," Dr. Hayes observed. "An advantage of twins, built-in companionship, and double the mischief once they become mobile," Charlotte added, lifting Lily, who immediately reached for the doctor's watch chain. "A favorite fascination," he chuckled, not minding the small fingers grasping the gold links. "I suspect these two will keep us both on our toes in the coming months." The casual "us" sent an unexpected warmth through Charlotte. In the weeks since, accepting the position, Dr. Hayes had gradually shifted from formal employer to something approaching a friend. He respected her intelligence, valued her contributions to his practice, and most surprisingly, showed genuine interest in her children's development. That evening, as she prepared supper while Dr. Hayes entertained the twins in the kitchen, Charlotte found herself contemplating a future she hadn't dared imagine when she first arrived in Pinewood Springs, one where purpose and belonging replaced desperation and uncertainty. The path ahead remained challenging, but for the first time since Robert's death, she faced it not with resignation, but with quiet anticipation. The remainder of the afternoon passed pleasantly as Charlotte prepared supper while Dr. Hayes entertained the twins in the kitchen. He had fashioned a safe enclosure from a large wooden box lined with blankets, allowing them freedom to practice sitting up while containing their increasing attempts at mobility. "Jacob used to escape every containment we devised," he remarked, helping Noah maintain his precarious balance. By 9 months, he could scale barriers twice his height. Charlotte noted how naturally he now shared memories of his children, a stark change from the guarded silence of her first weeks. "Noah shows similar determination," she replied. "Lily is more cautious, but equally persistent in her own way." "Different temperaments from the beginning," Dr. Hayes nodded. "Emily was our thinker, observed everything carefully before attempting anything new. Jacob leaped first and considered consequences later, if at all." Charlotte smiled, stirring the beef stew simmering on the stove. "My brother Edward was the same, always rushing headlong into adventure. I was forever patching his scrapes and bruises." "Your first medical experience?" he asked, a teasing light in his eyes. "I suppose it was," she laughed, though Edward was a reluctant patient at best. Their conversation continued through supper, comfortable and unforced. Charlotte described her childhood in Massachusetts, her years teaching at a small school in Boston, her brief marriage to Robert Foster. Dr. Hayes shared stories of his medical training, his decision to practice in Montana Territory rather than Philadelphia, his courtship of Catherine Hayes, who had followed him west despite her wealthy family's objections. "She never regretted it," he said, a bittersweet smile crossing his features. "Even during the harshest winters, the loneliest times when I was called away for days to remote homesteads, she maintained that our life here had meaning her Philadelphia existence lacked." "She sounds remarkable," Charlotte said gently. "She was." He gazed into the fire for a long moment, then visibly returned to the present. "As are you, Mrs. Foster. Few women would have shown your resilience in the face of Sullivan's rejection, let alone built a new life so quickly." "Necessity is a powerful motivator," Charlotte replied. "And I had help." She hesitated, then added, softly, "Your kindness made all the difference." Their eyes met across the table, something unspoken passing between them. The moment lingered until Lily broke it with a demanding cry for attention, as Charlotte tended to the twins' bedtime routine. Later that evening, her thoughts returned to that moment and the gradual transformation of her circumstances. 1 month ago, she had departed Boston with little hope beyond securing basic survival for her children. She had arrived in Pinewood Springs to rejection and seeming disaster. Yet somehow, she now found herself in a comfortable home with meaningful work, learning new skills under the guidance of a man who respected her intelligence and accepted, even welcomed, her children. Was this merely fortunate coincidence, she wondered, or something more deliberate? The question followed her into dreams, where Benjamin Hayes's grey eyes held promises she dared not interpret while awake. Morning brought a fresh perspective and new developments. Charlotte descended to the kitchen to find Dr. Hayes already dressed. For the day, a letter opened before him at the breakfast table. "News?" she inquired, moving to prepare coffee. "From the Territorial Medical Board," he confirmed. "They're sending an inspector next month to evaluate rural practices. Standard procedure, but it means additional preparation." Charlotte nodded, mentally calculating what records would need. "Organizing. We'll be ready, with your help, certainly." He hesitated, then continued. "The inspector will expect a properly qualified assistant, someone with documented training. She paused in measuring coffee grounds. "I have no formal medical training." "But you have education and intelligence," he countered, "and I have authority to train apprentices. With your permission, I'd like to register you officially as my medical apprentice. It would formalize the teaching I proposed yesterday." The offer startled her. "Are women permitted as medical apprentices?" "The territorial statutes don't specify gender requirements for apprenticeship," he replied. "Several female physicians practice in larger settlements farther east, all initially trained through similar arrangements." Charlotte considered the implications as she prepared breakfast. Medical apprenticeship represented a significant commitment beyond her current duties. More responsibility, more learning, perhaps eventually a professional identity beyond widow or mother. "This isn't an obligation," Dr. Hayes added, sensing a hesitation. "Merely an opportunity if you wish to pursue it." Charlotte set a plate of eggs before him, her decision forming. "I accept gratefully, though I expect the good people of Pinewood Springs may have opinions about a woman in such a role." "Undoubtedly," he agreed with a wry smile, "but they'll adapt, as they have to your presence here. Results speak louder than prejudice in frontier medicine." As they finished breakfast, a knock at the office door signaled the day's first patient. Charlotte rose to answer it, her step lighter than it had been in months. The path ahead remained uncertain, with challenges she could only dimly foresee, but for the first time since being widowed, she faced the future with something beyond resignation, with genuine hope and purpose. Dr. Hayes watched her go, a complex emotion crossing his features before he too rose to begin the day's work, not as a solitary physician, but as mentor and, perhaps in time, something more. Spring arrived in Montana Territory with surprising swiftness, melting snow into muddy streets and coaxing tentative green shoots from the thawing earth. 2 months had passed since Charlotte's arrival in Pinewood Springs, transforming her from rejected mail-order bride to respected medical apprentice, a transition that drew increasing attention as her new role became evident to the wider community. On this particular April morning, Charlotte moved efficiently through the doctor's office, preparing for the day's appointments while Dr. Hayes made house calls to several outlying farms. The twins, now 7 months old, played in their specially constructed enclosure in the corner of the office, a compromise that allowed Charlotte to work while keeping them under constant supervision. The bell above the door chimed, announcing the first patient of the day. Charlotte looked up, expecting Mrs. Harrison, who was scheduled for a pregnancy examination. Instead, 3 women entered. Abigail Sullivan, sister to Thomas, flanked by Eliza Campbell, wife of the bank manager, and Victoria Wilson, the mayor's wife. "Good morning, ladies," Charlotte greeted them with professional courtesy, though wariness tightened her shoulders. This unlikely delegation had never before graced the doctor's office as a group. "How may I assist you?" "We've come to see Dr. Hayes," Abigail Sullivan announced, her pinched features conveying disapproval as her gaze traveled from Charlotte to the twins and back. "On a matter of community concern. The doctor is making house calls this morning," Charlotte replied, maintaining her composure. "He should return by noon. I'd be happy to schedule an appointment, or I can assist with minor medical concerns in his absence." Eliza Campbell sniffed audibly. "This is precisely our concern, a woman, presuming to provide medical care without proper training." Charlotte straightened, meeting their gazes directly. "I serve as Dr. Hayes's apprentice, a position recognized by territorial statute. Any medical care I provide is under his direct supervision." "Apprentice!" Victoria Wilson exclaimed. "Women don't become doctors, Mrs. Foster. It's unnatural." "Several female physicians practice throughout the territory," Charlotte countered evenly. "Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell graduated from medical college nearly 30 years ago, opening the profession to qualified women." "Pinewood Springs is not New York City," Abigail Sullivan interjected. Our community has standards of propriety. A woman living unchaperoned in a man's home, handling intimate medical matters. It creates talk. The implication was unmistakable. Heat rose in Charlotte's cheeks, but she refused to be intimidated. My position here is entirely professional, Mrs. Sullivan. Dr. Hayes provides separate living quarters for me and my children, as any reputable employer would. Nevertheless, Eliza Campbell continued, we represent the Ladies' Aid Society, and we've come to express concern about the example this arrangement sets for impressionable young women in our community. Charlotte arched an eyebrow. The example of a widowed mother supporting her children through respectable employment, or the example of a woman pursuing education to better serve her community. The women exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for direct confrontation. Victoria Wilson recovered first. We merely suggest that conventional employment would be more appropriate. The school board is seeking a teacher's assistant. The position would better suit your prior experience and a woman's natural temperament. At half the compensation, Charlotte noted, with no accommodation for my children during working hours. Your concern for my welfare is touching but unnecessary. Before the conversation could continue, the door opened again, admitting Martha. Jenkins and Amy Wilson, both carrying covered dishes. We brought lunch, Martha announced cheerfully, then paused, taking in the tense tableau. Ladies, what a surprise to find you here. None of your family members have fallen ill, I hope. The shift in atmosphere was immediate and telling. Martha Jenkins, as a respected founding resident of Pinewood Springs, wielded considerable social influence that clearly matched or exceeded that of the current visitors. We came to discuss a matter of community standards, Abigail Sullivan replied stiffly. How thoughtful. Martha set her dish on a side table with deliberate calm. Though I can't imagine what standards apply to medical care beyond competence and compassion, both of which Dr. Hayes and Mrs. Foster provide in abundance. It's the arrangement that concerns us, Eliza Campbell clarified, her confidence visibly weakening under Martha's steady gaze. A young widow living in a bachelor's home, apprenticing in medicine. It's highly irregular. Martha's expression hardened imperceptibly. So was typhoid fever taking half our children before Benjamin established his practice here. So was women dying in childbirth before they had access to proper medical care. If irregular arrangements save lives, I'll champion them gladly over. Outdated proprieties? An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only by Lily's babbling as she pulled herself to standing using the edge of her enclosure. The moment's tension dissipated as all eyes turned to the achievement, several women, including Victoria Wilson, instinctively smiling at the baby's triumphant expression. 7 months and already standing, Amy observed, moving to admire the twins. They're thriving under your care, Charlotte, and the office runs more smoothly than I've ever seen it. The subtle reinforcement of Charlotte's positive impact wasn't lost on the visitors. Abigail Sullivan adjusted her shawl, clearly recognizing that this confrontation wouldn't yield her desired outcome. We've expressed our concerns. The Ladies' Aid Society will be discussing this matter further at our next meeting. Splendid, Martha replied pleasantly. I look forward to attending. As founding president, I've been remiss in my participation. Lately, the 3 women departed shortly thereafter, leaving Charlotte, Martha, and Amy in a moment of shared triumph that quickly dissolved into laughter once the door closed. Their faces when you mentioned being founding president, Amy chuckled, as if they'd forgotten who established the society in the first place. Convenient memories, Martha agreed, unpacking the lunch she'd brought. Fresh bread, sliced ham, and early spring greens from her cold frame. Though we shouldn't underestimate Abigail Sullivan's determination. She's never forgiven Benjamin for choosing to marry Martha's sister instead of her 15 years ago. Charlotte looked up in surprise from where she'd knelt to praise Lily's new accomplishment. I hadn't realized there was history there. Ancient history, Martha waved dismissively, but Abigail harbors grudges like others collect china figurines. Your presence here, young, intelligent, clearly valued by Benjamin, has rekindled her resentment. Dr. Hayes and I maintain a strictly professional relationship. Charlotte felt compelled to clarify, though a warmth spread across her cheeks. That suggested complexity beneath the statement. Martha and Amy exchanged knowing glances that Charlotte pretended not to notice. Professional or not, Amy said practically, you've revitalized this practice. Patients who previously avoided medical care now come regularly, especially women and mothers with young children. And Benjamin smiles again, Martha added softly. That alone would earn you the undying enmity of Abigail Sullivan, who spent 4 years offering comfort to the grieving widower without receiving so much as a second glance. This new understanding of the morning's confrontation left Charlotte unsettled throughout the afternoon. As she assisted patients, recorded treatments, and managed the increasingly busy office, her mind returned repeatedly to Martha's casual mention of Dr. Hayes smiling again, and the implication that she was somehow responsible. Did others in town share Abigail Sullivan's suspicions about her relationship with the doctor? The thought troubled her. Charlotte had built a new life centered on independence and professional respect, far removed from her original purpose in coming to Pinewood Springs. The last thing she wanted was speculation that undermined her hard-won position or complicated her working relationship with Benjamin Hayes. Yet she couldn't deny that the relationship had evolved beyond employer and employee. Their evenings often extended long after the twins were asleep, sharing medical texts or discussing interesting cases. He treated her more as colleague than servant, valuing her observations and encouraging her growing knowledge. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught expressions on his face that stirred feelings she'd believed buried with her husband. The doctor returned mid-afternoon, removing his coat and hat as he entered through the private entrance connecting the house to the office. Charlotte was examining a young child's rash, one of the minor ailments she now handled independently, but felt immediately aware of his presence in a way that confirmed her earlier concerns. "Mrs. Foster," he greeted her, his voice warming, the professional address. "Anything requiring my attention?" "Several messages," she replied, completing her examination. "And Mrs. Jenkins and Amy brought lunch. There's plenty left if you're hungry." Once the young patient departed with salve for the rash and instructions for care, Charlotte briefed Dr. Hayes on the morning's appointments and messages. She hesitated before mentioning the delegation's visit, unsure how to frame their concerns without creating awkwardness. He noticed her hesitation immediately. Something else happened. "What is it?" "The Ladies' Aid Society sent representatives," Charlotte admitted. "Mrs. Sullivan, Mrs. Campbell, and Mrs. Wilson expressed concerns about the propriety of our working arrangement." His expression darkened. Abigail Sullivan's doing, no doubt. What precisely were these concerns? Charlotte smoothed her apron unnecessarily. "That a woman shouldn't practice medicine. That my living here sets a poor example. That our arrangement appears improper." She struggled to maintain a neutral tone on the last word. "I see." His jaw tightened. "And your response?" "I explained that my position is professional and recognized by territorial statute." Ruth and Amy arrived fortuitously and offered additional perspective. Dr. Hayes's tension visibly eased. "Martha can be formidable when defending those she cares about." "She mentioned something interesting," Charlotte ventured, curiosity overcoming caution, "that Mrs. Sullivan once had expectations regarding you." He looked genuinely surprised. Then understanding dawned. "Ah, ancient history from before I met Catherine," Abigail's father suggested an arrangement between our families that never progressed beyond preliminary discussions. I see, Charlotte replied, relieved by his dismissive tone, yet still troubled. Nevertheless, I wouldn't want gossip to damage your standing in the community or the practice's reputation. Dr. Hayes studied her for a long moment. Are you concerned? About your own reputation, Mrs. Foster, or mine? Both, she admitted. I've worked hard to establish myself here. You've given me opportunities I never imagined possible. I wouldn't want misperceptions to jeopardize either. His expression softened. Charlotte, he said, using her given name for the first time. Frontier communities run on practical realities, not social niceties. Your work here speaks for itself. Anyone truly concerned about community welfare recognizes the value you bring to this practice. The use of her first name shifted something between them, an acknowledgement of connection beyond professional courtesy. Charlotte felt it like a physical change in the air, both welcome and unsettling. Perhaps, she conceded, but perception often overshadows reality, especially where women's reputations are concerned. Then we address it directly, he decided, his tone turning brisk. I've been invited to speak at this Sunday's church service about spring health precautions. I'll use the opportunity to formally introduce you as my registered medical apprentice. Public acknowledgement should quell the worst of the gossip. The solution was practical and sensible, exactly what she would expect from him. Charlotte nodded. Agreement, pushing aside the complicated feelings their conversation had stirred. Sunday arrived clear and unseasonably warm, drawing nearly the entire settlement to the white clapboard church at the end of Main Street. Charlotte sat beside Martha in a pew near the front, the twins clean and presentable in their best clothes, though Noah fussed against the confinement of the formal setting. Reverend Anderson delivered a brief sermon on renewal and growth before introducing Dr. Hayes to speak on seasonal health matters. Charlotte listened attentively as he discussed precautions against spring illnesses, proper nutrition after winter's limited diet, and the importance of cleaning water sources contaminated by snowmelt. Finally, he concluded, I wish to make a formal announcement regarding my medical practice. As many of you know, Mrs. Charlotte Foster has been assisting me these past 2 months, bringing welcome organization and additional care to our community. Today, I'm pleased to announce that the Territorial Medical Board has approved Mrs. Foster's registration as an official medical apprentice under my supervision. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Charlotte kept her expression composed, despite feeling every eye upon her. This appointment recognizes Mrs. Foster's intelligence, dedication, and natural healing abilities, Dr. Hayes continued. Pinewood Springs will benefit greatly from having additional medical expertise, particularly for women's concerns and children's ailments. I hope you'll join me in congratulating her on this achievement. He gestured for Charlotte to stand. She did so reluctantly, balancing Lily on her hip while Martha held Noah. The congregation's response was mixed. Some applauded politely, others whispered behind raised hands, and a few, notably Abigail Sullivan and her companions, sat with stony expressions. Mrs. Foster will increasingly handle routine cases independently, Dr. Hayes explained, allowing me to devote more time to serious conditions and distant homesteads where medical care has been limited. This arrangement expands medical services, available to all residents of Pinewood Springs and surrounding areas. His framing was masterful, Charlotte realized, positioning her role as community benefit rather than personal advancement, emphasizing practical advantages that even the most traditional residents would find difficult to dismiss. By the time they exited the church, several women had approached to congratulate her, including some who had previously kept their distance. Well handled, Martha murmured as they walked home for Sunday dinner. Benjamin always did know how to manage public opinion when it mattered to him. The medical benefits are genuine, Charlotte pointed out. It's not merely a matter of impression. Course, Martha agreed, but make no mistake. My brother-in-law rarely makes public pronouncements unless something matters deeply to him. The implication lingered in Charlotte's mind throughout dinner and into the evening as she prepared for the coming week's appointments. If her position truly mattered deeply to Benjamin Hayes, beyond practical considerations, what did that suggest about his feelings toward her? The question remained unanswered as Monday dawned bright and busy. Charlotte focused on work, pushing personal considerations aside as patient after patient arrived seeking treatment for various spring ailments. By mid-afternoon, she had independently handled a dozen minor cases, feeling growing confidence in her medical judgment. As the last scheduled patient departed, the office door opened again, admitting Thomas Sullivan. Charlotte straightened, surprised by his unexpected appearance. "Mr. Sullivan," she acknowledged coolly, "how may we assist you?" "I need to speak with Hayes," he replied tersely, "privately. Dr. Hayes is performing a minor surgery. He should be finished shortly." "You're welcome." To wait. Sullivan remained standing, his expression unusually agitated. "I'll wait in his private office." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Charlotte countered firmly. "Patient records and confidential correspondence are kept there." Anger flashed across Sullivan's face. "You presume to dictate terms to me? You're nothing but a glorified nurse, playing at medicine while living under a man's roof without the benefit of marriage. Don't overestimate your position in this town, Mrs. Foster." The attack was so unexpected and virulent that Charlotte momentarily lost her composure. She took a steadying breath before responding. "Your personal opinion of me is irrelevant, Mr. Sullivan. Office procedures apply equally to everyone, regardless of their standing in Pinewood Springs." "We'll see about that," Sullivan muttered. "Things are changing. Your unnatural arrangement with Hayes won't continue unchallenged." Before Charlotte could respond, Dr. Hayes emerged from the surgery, removing a blood-stained apron and washing his hands thoroughly at the basin. His expression darkened as he took in Sullivan's hostile stance and Charlotte's rigid posture. "Sullivan," he acknowledged curtly. "What brings you here?" "A matter requiring private discussion," Sullivan replied, "regarding certain investments and community concerns." Dr. Hayes dried his hands methodically. "Mrs. Foster has my complete confidence. Anything you wish to discuss can be said in her presence." The merchant's jaw tightened. "Very well. The town council met yesterday evening. There's a movement to enforce certain moral standards for businesses operating in Pinewood Springs, particularly those serving vulnerable populations." "Meaning?" Dr. Hayes prompted, though his expression suggested he already understood the implication. "Meaning your living and working arrangements with Mrs. Foster have raised concerns about the propriety of your medical practice," Sullivan stated, bluntly. "Either formalize your relationship through marriage, replace her with a male assistant, or face the possibility of official censure from the council." Shock rendered Charlotte momentarily speechless. The ultimatum laid bare the extent of opposition to her position and the limited options for addressing it. Dr. Hayes, however, appeared more angry than surprised. "The council has no authority over medical licensure or practice," he said coldly. "That falls under territorial jurisdiction." "True," Sullivan conceded with a thin smile. "But the council approves all business licenses within town limits. Your office operates under such a license, renewal due next month." The implicit threat hung in the air. Without a business license, Dr. Hayes could continue practicing medicine, but would be forced to relocate his office outside town boundaries, a significant hardship for both him and his patients. "Who exactly comprises this movement?" Dr. Hayes demanded. "You and whoever else holds debt at your bank? Or is Blackwater Mining Company applying pressure again for my support of their clinic proposal? Sullivan's expression confirmed the accuracy of at least one assumption. Various concerned citizens share these views, including prominent church members, business leaders, and the Ladies' Aid Society. How convenient that moral outrage aligns so perfectly with business interests, Dr. Hayes observed coldly. The council meets next Friday, correct? I'll address these concerns formally at that time. As is your right, Sullivan acknowledged, but be prepared for public discussion of matters you might prefer kept private. His gaze shifted meaningfully to Charlotte before he departed, leaving tension thick in his wake. When the door closed behind him, Charlotte finally found her voice. I'm so sorry. I never intended to create such difficulties for you or the practice. You've created nothing, Dr. Hayes replied firmly. This is about control, not morality. Sullivan's never forgiven me for purchasing the land he wanted for expansion 10 years ago. The Blackwater situation merely adds current motivation to old grudges. Charlotte shook her head, unconvinced. Nevertheless, your practice shouldn't suffer because of my presence. She hesitated. Perhaps I should... Don't, he interrupted, his voice softening as he moved closer. Don't suggest leaving, Charlotte. Whatever Sullivan and his allies attempt, we'll face it together. The conviction in his voice steadied her, but Sullivan's ultimatum echoed in her mind. Either formalize their relationship through marriage, replace her with a male assistant, or face official censure. The options felt equally impossible and the coming confrontation unavoidable. The week leading up to the town council meeting passed in a storm of activity. Word of Sullivan's ultimatum spread through Pinewood Springs with the speed of prairie fire, dividing the community into factions. While Charlotte maintained professional composure during office hours, privately she battled waves of anxiety about the impending confrontation and its potential consequences. On Thursday afternoon, as the last patient departed, Charlotte closed the office ledger with uncharacteristic force. This is absurd, she declared, turning to Dr. Hayes, who was organizing surgical instruments in the adjacent room. The council meeting tomorrow will be about me, not the practice. My presence is causing division in a community that accepted you without question for 20 years. Dr. Hayes looked up, his expression somber. This isn't about you, Charlotte. It's about power and who wields it in Pinewood Springs. Sullivan and his allies are using our arrangement as convenient leverage for broader aims. Nevertheless, I'm the leverage they're using, she countered, moving to stand in the doorway. I've been thinking about Martha's offer. His brow furrowed. What offer? To manage her boarding house while she visits her son in Denver this summer. The position includes accommodation for me and the twins. Charlotte's voice remained steady despite the tightness in her chest. It would eliminate the immediate pretext for opposition to your practice. Dr. Hayes set down the instruments with deliberate care. For a long moment he remained silent, his back to her, as he seemingly studied the contents of the medical cabinet. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an edge she'd never heard before. Is that what you want, Charlotte? To abandon your medical training? To retreat into conventional women's work because a few small-minded individuals object to your advancement? Of course not, she replied, stung by his characterization. I've found purpose and fulfillment in this work that I never imagined possible, but I won't be the cause of destroying what you've built here. He turned then, crossing the distance. Between them with purposeful strides, you've become essential to what we're building here, not just to the practice, but to the community's health. Every woman who brings her children to you, rather than suffering in silence. Every expectant mother who receives proper care because she trusts you. They matter more than Sullivan's machinations. The intensity in his grey eyes held her immobile. They stood barely a foot apart, closer than propriety would strictly allow, close enough that Charlotte could detect the faint scent of the carbolic soap he used after examinations. "Benjamin," she said softly, using his given name for the first time, "I don't want to leave, but I see no acceptable alternative." His expression shifted at the sound of his name on her lips. "There is another option," he said, voice dropping, to match her quiet tone. "One I've considered for weeks, but hesitated to propose for fear of appearing to take advantage of your situation." Charlotte's pulse quickened as she grasped his meaning. "Marriage," she whispered. "Yes." His gaze remained steady on hers. "Not as Sullivan's ultimatum demands, but as a partnership of equals. Your medical apprenticeship would continue, your children would have stability, and together we could build something meaningful here in Pinewood Springs." "A marriage of convenience," Charlotte stated, needing clarity despite the sudden hollowness in her chest. "No," Benjamin shook his head firmly. "A marriage of choice, of mutual respect, of—" He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Growing affection, at least on my part." The admission hung between them, altering the atmosphere as surely as storm clouds transform a summer sky. Charlotte struggled to form a response, her carefully maintained composure fragmenting under the weight of his words and her own conflicted emotions. "I need time," she finally managed. "This is unexpected." Understanding crossed his features as he stepped back, restoring the proper distance between them. "Of course, take whatever time you need. My proposal stands independent of tomorrow's council meeting, which I'll handle regardless of your decision." Charlotte nodded gratefully, though confusion still clouded her thoughts. "I should check on the twins," she murmured, retreating toward the connecting passage to their living quarters. "Charlotte," Benjamin called softly as she reached the door. She paused without turning. "Whatever you decide, your position here is secure. I'll contest any attempt to separate you from the work you've come to love." His promise followed her. Through the evening as she tended to the twins, prepared dinner, and moved through the domestic routines that punctuated her days. After the children were asleep, she sat alone in the small sitting room, adjoining her bedroom, a medical text opened but unread in her lap. Marriage to Benjamin Hayes. The prospect simultaneously terrified and attracted her. Their professional partnership had evolved into genuine friendship over the past months. She respected his intelligence, admired his dedication to his patients, appreciated his acceptance of her children. But marriage meant vulnerability of a different kind, opening herself to potential heartbreak should his growing affection prove insufficient foundation for lifelong commitment. Her first marriage, though brief, had been built on romantic love. Robert Foster had courted her properly, won her heart with poetry and promises, created a vision of their future that included children and companionship. His death had shattered that vision, leaving Charlotte to navigate widowhood and motherhood. Simultaneously, would marriage to Benjamin offer security without love, or could respect and shared purpose evolve into deeper attachment? And did she even want that possibility, with the risk of loss it inevitably carried? Sleep eluded her long, into the night as she weighed options and examined her own conflicted heart. Dawn found her still undecided, but determined to face the council meeting with dignity, regardless of personal turmoil. Friday dawned bright and unseasonably warm for late April. Charlotte dressed with particular care in her best navy dress, with white collar and cuffs, her honey blonde hair arranged in a simple but elegant knot. The outfit projected capability and respectability, qualities she would need in abundance at the afternoon's confrontation. The morning passed in a blur of patience and preparations. Benjamin was unusually quiet, respecting her need for space. To consider his proposal, Martha arrived shortly before noon to watch the twins during the meeting, greeting Charlotte with a worried smile. "Half the town will be there," she informed them over a hasty lunch. "Sullivan has been rallying supporters all week, but you have allies too. Every woman you've treated is speaking in your defense." "I appreciate their support," Charlotte replied, "though I regret putting them in the position of opposing established authorities." Martha snorted indelicately. "Established authorities need opposing when they overstep. Thomas Sullivan may own the largest store in town, but that doesn't give him the right to dictate how people live or work." At precisely 2 o'clock, Charlotte and Benjamin entered Pinewood Springs Town Hall, a modest building adjacent to the church. The meeting room was already filled to capacity, townspeople packed onto wooden benches with barely room to shift position. A raised platform at the front held a long table where the 5 council members sat with varying expressions of discomfort or determination. Mayor Wilson occupied the center position, flanked by Thomas Sullivan and bank manager William Campbell. On one side, blacksmith Joseph Miller and farmer Elias Thompson on the other. The composition suggested a divided council, 2 merchants aligned with Sullivan's interests, 2 working men who might prove more sympathetic to practical considerations. Charlotte and Benjamin found seats near the front, courtesy of Amy Wilson, who had saved places for them. As they settled, Charlotte felt dozens of gazes upon them, some supportive, others openly hostile. Abigail Sullivan, seated prominently in the front row opposite them, made no attempt to hide her contemptuous scrutiny. Mayor Wilson called the meeting to order with obvious reluctance. "We gather to address concerns raised regarding certain businesses and practices within town limits," he began diplomatically. "Specifically whether particular arrangements at Dr. Hayes's medical practice meet community standards expected of Pinewood Springs establishments." "Speak plainly, Wilson," Sullivan interrupted. "The issue is whether a woman with no medical credentials should be permitted to practice medicine while living unchaperoned in a bachelor's home. It's a matter of public health and public morality." Benjamin rose immediately, his composure unwavering despite the provocation. "If we are speaking plainly, let's acknowledge what this is really about. Mrs. Foster is formally registered with the Territorial Medical Board as my apprentice, a legal position, recognized throughout Montana Territory. Her presence in my household is as a respected employee with separate living quarters." "Separate quarters under the same roof," Campbell interjected, "which creates the appearance of impropriety regardless of actual arrangements." "I wasn't aware." "The council regulated appearances rather than actions," Benjamin countered evenly. "Mrs. Foster's character is beyond reproach. Her work has substantially improved medical care available to this community, particularly for women and children who previously suffered in silence rather than consult a male physician." Charlotte maintained a dignified expression despite her discomfort at being discussed as though absent. Around the room, she noted several women nodding agreement with Benjamin's assessment, mothers whose children she had treated, expectant women she had guided through pregnancy complications. "No one questions Mrs. Foster's technical competence," Sullivan stated dismissively. "The issue is propriety. Pinewood Springs businesses must maintain standards that reflect our community values. A woman living in a man's household without the benefit of marriage or family relationship violates those standards. Does it indeed?" The new voice came from Martha Jenkins, who had risen from her seat near the back. "If so, I must be violating standards as well, housing single men and women under one roof at my boarding house." "That's different," Abigail Sullivan objected immediately. "Boarding houses have established protocols and separate facilities." "As does my brother-in-law's residence," Martha countered. "The real difference is that Charlotte Foster threatens certain people's assumptions about women's proper place." The exchange ignited a wave of comments from the assembled crowd, voices rising as people took sides. Mayor Wilson banged his gavel repeatedly, struggling to restore order. In the momentary, Lull that followed, Charlotte made her decision. She stood, smoothing her skirts with steady hands, before addressing the council directly. "Gentlemen, if I may speak on my own behalf." Mayor Wilson nodded, relief evident in his expression at having someone new take the floor. "Proceed, Mrs. Foster." Charlotte surveyed the room, drawing strength from the supportive faces among the hostile ones. "I came to Pinewood Springs as a widow with infant twins, seeking security through marriage to Mr. Thomas Sullivan, who had advertised for a bride in Eastern newspapers." A ripple of reaction passed through the crowd at this direct reference to her initial rejection. Thomas Sullivan's face darkened, but Charlotte continued undeterred. "Upon arrival, I found my circumstances misunderstood and my children unwelcome. When that arrangement failed, Dr. Hayes offered employment that recognized my educational background and provided accommodations suitable for a woman with young children." Her steady gaze moved from face to face among the council members. "During these past 3 months, I have assisted with dozens of medical cases, maintained precise records of treatments and outcomes, and studied extensively to increase my knowledge of modern medical practice. Women who previously avoided treatment now seek care regularly. Children receive prompt attention for injuries and illnesses." Charlotte paused, drawing a deep breath before continuing with measured certainty. "I understand concerns about appearances. Propriety matters in close communities, but surely substance matters more than appearance. The question before you isn't whether our arrangement looks conventional, but whether it serves the greater good of Pinewood Springs' citizens." The silence that followed her statement felt charged with possibility. She remained standing, shoulders straight, gaze steady, presenting herself not as a woman seeking approval, but as a professional defending her right to serve. Blacksmith Joseph Miller broke the silence, addressing his fellow council members. "My wife Esther wouldn't be alive without Mrs. Foster's quick thinking when she hemorrhaged after our last baby came. Doc Hayes was 10 miles away at Jensen's place. Mrs. Foster knew exactly what to do, saved Esther's life before he could even get there." His weathered face hardened as he looked at Sullivan. "I don't much care about appearances when weighed against my wife's life." Farmer Thompson nodded agreement. "My daughter won't see any doctor but Mrs. Foster for her female complaints. Says she suffered for years before having someone she could speak to openly." Mayor Wilson, sensing the council's division and the community sentiment, attempted compromise. Perhaps a formal chaperoning arrangement could address the propriety concerns while allowing Mrs. Foster's valuable work to continue. Or perhaps, Benjamin said, rising to stand beside Charlotte, a more permanent solution is appropriate. He turned to face her directly, taking her hands in his. "Charlotte Foster, I intended a more private setting for this, but circumstances demand directness. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, partner in life as you've become partner in my practice?" Gasps and murmurs erupted around the room. Charlotte's eyes widened at the public proposal, so different from their private discussion. Yet as she looked into Benjamin's face, she saw not calculation, but genuine emotion, affection, respect, and something deeper that stirred answering feelings in her own heart. In that moment of connection, her doubts dissolved like morning mist under Montana sunshine. This was no marriage of convenience or strategic alliance, but the natural culmination of a relationship built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and growing attachment that she now recognized had matured into love on both sides. "Yes," she replied. "With quiet certainty, I will." The simple acceptance transformed the atmosphere instantly. Applause broke out from supporters, while even critics appeared mollified by the prospect of convention being satisfied. Only Abigail Sullivan maintained her stony expression, rising abruptly to exit the hall with dramatic indignation. Mayor Wilson seized the opportunity to conclude the contentious meeting. "Well, It appears concerns about propriety will be addressed through the most traditional means possible. Unless there are objections, I propose we consider this matter resolved and move to regularly scheduled business. As the meeting shifted to mundane town matters, Charlotte and Benjamin slipped outside into the afternoon sunshine, still holding hands as they walked slowly toward home. "That was quite a performance," Charlotte said when they were beyond earshot of the hall, "though I can't help wondering if you felt pressured by circumstances to make such a public declaration." Benjamin stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "The public setting was expedient, I admit, but the sentiment behind it was entirely genuine." His eyes held hers with unwavering sincerity. "I've known since you stood up to Sullivan in my office that first day that you were a woman of exceptional character. What I couldn't have anticipated was how completely you would transform not just my practice, but my life." Charlotte felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I came to Pinewood Springs, seeking security, expecting to sacrifice independence for stability. Instead, I found a partnership I never imagined possible, professional and personal." "Is that a yes, under less dramatic circumstances?" Benjamin asked, a hint of vulnerability beneath his calm exterior. In answer, Charlotte rose on tiptoes to press a gentle kiss to his cheek, her first such gesture, shocking in its public setting, yet perfect in its timing. "It's a yes without reservation or condition," she confirmed softly. "Not for appearance or convenience, but because I've discovered that the heart can heal and open again to possibilities I thought forever lost." Their return to the doctor's residence, soon to be their shared home in truth as well as appearance, was accompanied by congratulatory calls from neighbors and patients who had witnessed the proposal. Martha greeted them at the door, her knowing smile suggesting she had anticipated this outcome long before either of them had recognized its inevitability. Inside, the twins babbled happily in their play area, unaware that their world had just shifted axis once again. Noah pulled himself up on unsteady legs, reaching toward Benjamin with complete trust in his chubby hands. Lily watched her brother with calculating eyes, clearly planning her own approach to mobility. As Charlotte observed Benjamin lifting Noah with practiced ease, his expression one of genuine affection rather than obligation, she marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From rejected mail-order bride to respected medical apprentice to future wife and partner, each apparent setback revealing itself as a step toward unexpected happiness. "We'll need to write to the medical board," Benjamin said pragmatically, though his eyes remained soft as he bounced Noah gently. "Your apprenticeship status changes somewhat as my wife, but there are precedents for husband-wife medical practices throughout the territory." "Practical considerations already," Charlotte teased, lifting Lily as the little girl demanded equal attention. "We've been engaged for less than an hour." "Professional and personal," Benjamin replied with a smile that transformed his serious features. "That's our partnership, isn't it? In all aspects of life." The simple truth of his statement settled over Charlotte like a benediction. Whatever challenges lay ahead, from Sullivan's continued opposition to the everyday difficulties of frontier medicine, they would face them together, their unexpected family forged not from conventional beginnings but from mutual respect, shared purpose, and love that had bloomed in the most unlikely soil. 4 weeks later, the Pinewood Springs Church had never looked more beautiful. Wildflowers gathered from the surrounding prairie filled simple mason jars along the pews, their vibrant colors standing bright against the whitewashed walls. Sunlight streamed through windows thrown open to catch the gentle breeze carrying the sweet scent of early summer across the gathered congregation. Charlotte stood in the small antechamber, Martha making final adjustments to her dress, ivory silk that had once belonged to Catherine Hayes, carefully altered to fit Charlotte's slighter frame. "Catherine would be pleased," Martha said softly, smoothing the delicate lace at the collar. She always hoped Benjamin would find happiness again. "I wish I could have known her," Charlotte replied, touching the cameo brooch Martha had insisted she wear, a family heirloom passing from one Hayes bride to the next. "From everything you've shared, we would have been friends. Sisters. More. Likely." Martha blinked rapidly, controlling emotion with practiced dignity. "You share her practical nature and her unwillingness to accept arbitrary limitations." She stepped back to assess the final effect. "Perfect. Now, are the twins ready for their grand entrance?" Charlotte smiled, glancing to where 8-month-old Lily and Noah sat in matching outfits, unusually clean and presentable. Both babies had begun crawling with determination, Noah slightly ahead in motor skills, while Lily excelled in verbal development. They would participate in the ceremony in their own way, carried by Martha and Amy as honorary attendants. "As ready as they'll ever be," Charlotte replied, "though I suspect Noah will attempt to escape the moment the ceremony begins." "Peter is prepared for interception," Martha assured her with a chuckle. "That boy has grown remarkably nimble since your children arrived." A gentle knock at the door announced Reverend Anderson, his kind face appearing around the edge as he entered. "It's time, Mrs. Foster. Dr. Hayes appears to be wearing a groove in the floorboards with his pacing." Charlotte took a deep, steadying breath. Unlike her first wedding, a small, solemn affair overshadowed by wartime anxieties, this ceremony represented not desperate hope, but confident certainty. She had come to know Benjamin Hayes through daily interaction, professional partnership, and quiet evenings of conversation. Their foundation was built not on romantic illusion, but on mutual respect, shared purpose, and affection that had deepened into love through time and understanding. "I'm ready," she said, gathering her simple bouquet of prairie roses. The small church had filled to capacity, townspeople crowding the pews in their Sunday finest. Charlotte noted with satisfaction that the attendance included not just supporters, but former critics as well, all save Abigail Sullivan, whose conspicuous absence surprised no one. Even Thomas Sullivan sat in a back pew, his expression unreadable, but his presence a tacit acknowledgement that Pinewood Springs had accepted this unconventional union. Benjamin waited at the altar, tall and distinguished in his best black suit, his normally serious expression transformed by barely contained joy as Charlotte proceeded slowly down the aisle. Behind her came Martha, carrying Lily and Amy with Noah, both babies wide-eyed at the unusual gathering. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, traditional vows spoken with quiet conviction by both bride and groom. When Reverend Anderson invited Benjamin to kiss his bride, the gentle touch of his lips against hers felt like both culmination and beginning, closing one chapter of their story while opening another filled with promise. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Noah broke free from Amy's arms, crawling with remarkable speed toward his mother and new stepfather. The laughter that rippled through the assembly dispelled any remaining formality, as Benjamin scooped up the determined infant, including him, in their first moments as a family. In that joyful chaos of celebration, Charlotte caught Benjamin's eye and saw reflected there the same wonder she felt, that sometimes life's greatest disappointments lead not to despair, but to unexpected joy, that family can be found where least expected, and that the heart's capacity to heal and love again is perhaps its most remarkable quality of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.